This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are covering Genesis 15 through 17, continuing our look at the evolving partnership between God and Abram.
Absolutely. We should start with just a little bit of review. We love to review, Brent. Reviewing is one of the things, we won't do it every single episode, all the time. Back when we used to teach this as a class on a college campus, we would review at the beginning of every class, 90-minute class. Eventually, by the time we got to the end of the Bible, we were doing like a 40-minute review, and I didn't do a single class without doing review. We love review because it enables us to see. We don't want to just study a passage in a vacuum. We want to remember where every new story is showing up in the greater story. Part of what we love to do about Bema is tell the narrative as a narrative. Like, we want people to understand the Bible as a narrative. We don't think enough people have a larger understanding of how the story of God works and how it unfolds as an actual kind of a chronological narrative and a chronological understanding and telling of God's story. So we love to review. And we start with Genesis 1 through 11, which we called the preface. And it's a story of origins. And it was 11 chapters of God inviting us to reframe how we see the world. Who is God? Who is mankind? What is the nature of creation? How do these things work together? Like the big meta-level principles of who God is and what God's doing in the world and how we as humans relate to that. And so it sets the stage. It's a preface. And then we walked into the introduction, which has been telling us a story. We're just beginning the story of the family of God. God finds a partner. He finds somebody who's willing to trust the story. Because the preface, did we find a whole lot of people willing to trust the story in the preface, Brent?
Not as much as we would like.
Nope. We had this moment with Noah. We were like, yes, Noah. And then Noah comes out and kind of screws the story up. And we didn't have a whole lot of hope in Genesis 1 through 11. But we get to the end of Genesis 11 and we find some hope, and God jumps on it, and he says, I need a partner. And he partners with Avram, who is willing to say no to the story of self-preservation. And Avram, he's willing to give himself for the good of others. So instead of having a story built on fear that there's not enough, that he has to protect his own name, protect his own future, protect himself, Avram's willing to say, I don't really care about my future if I can take care of somebody else. I don't really care about my name and whether or not I'm going to trust that there's enough good and enough provision, enough goodness in the world that I can actually take care of others without having to worry about myself. And so he finds this barren niece of his named Yiska, who now just her father's died. She's an orphan. And he says, I'm going to make sure she's taken care of. And that's where God shows up in our last episode and kind of defines that partnership.
Yeah, we saw over the last few chapters of Genesis, the last couple of episodes, like he made some mistakes, but boy, like when you look at what is normal for his culture, what the assumptions would be, like he's making some pretty crazy choices. Everyone else is looking at him. You're like, you let your nephew pick the land?
Right.
What?
Right.
What are you doing? You're in charge here, dude.
Absolutely.
And he makes some pretty incredible choices to trust.
Absolutely. He makes mistakes, but I love that. He also makes some great choices. We've seen his character. We've seen how he's willing to go rescue others, and he lets go of his own desires. He lets go of his own understandings, his own plans, because he has made mistakes, and he's learned from those mistakes, and now he's leaning back into trusting the story. We saw character in the fact that he's the type of guy that will build altars and pitch tents rather than build towers and settle down. Like we saw in the Tower of Babel, a group of people that wanted to build a tower and settle down. But here's Avram willing to stay mobile and build altars. Like he's got it. He's a little backwards from culture, but in all the right ways. And so that's what brings us to Genesis 15. It's been a long road for Avram to get here, but some beautiful things we've seen. But maybe we'll have to see if Avram's feeling good or maybe he's a little frustrated. But We got a presentation today, Brent, yeah?
We do have a presentation. You can find that in the show notes. And there is one image that will come a little bit later it should pop up in your podcast app as you're listening. So the image will be there in the app, but there's a lot of text, and so we have a full presentation as well.
Absolutely.
Genesis 15. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward.
See, when I hear that, I think I hear God coming in like, I don't know how, we're going to find out here in the next verse how Avram feels. But I think after these chapters, I think God is like, yes, Avram, like, yes, you haven't been perfect and you had that little mistake down in Egypt and that's going to be a problem. But yes, like you're trusting the story. This is what the partnership looks like. I hear almost God kind of like erupting in this. Like, don't be afraid, Avram. I know this is tricky. I know this is hard, but do not be afraid. I am your shield. Like, I hear God like fist pumping as he, like, yes. But we'll see what does Avram say?
But Avram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?
All right. So Avram's like, all right, sure. You're my shield and you're my great reward, but excuse me, God, I don't know what reward is left. Like, what could you possibly reward me with since I just kissed away the one who could actually inherit in my own household and my own name. Like, all I have left is Eliezer. Like, all I have left is my servant. He's not a descendant of mine. He's not a descendant of Terah. He's not my nephew. He's my servant. And that the very next, just give me the first three words of verse 3.
And Avram said.
We've seen this before, Brent, if you remember. We saw this in the Tower of Babel episode, where the people said stuff, and then God said nothing. We said, whenever you see, and Avram said, and then that same paragraph, in that same discourse, and Avram said, it means there's a break in the conversation. If there wasn't a break in the conversation, it wouldn't repeat that phrase. So there's a break with nothing in the middle. So in the Tower of Babel episode, the people said something and God was like, yeah, it's fine. Said nothing. Didn't have anything to say. And then the people said the next thing, and that's when God showed up and was like, all right, hold on, I got something to say. Here, Avram says, oh, really, God, what can you give me? Like, what kind of reward are we talking about? And God says, what, Brent?
Nothing.
Apparently, God doesn't want to answer that question. Apparently, God says, nothing. Avram says, I love that you're excited, God, but what kind of reward are we talking about?
And my question is, how much time passes before Avram comes back and says something else again?
Absolutely. And we don't know. I love that question, because this could be moments, but it could also be days, weeks. I mean, it's probably not, but shoot, it could be years. Like, how long does Avram let God, is he just immediately like, no, I want an answer now? Or does he let this sit for a few days and then say, okay, God, let's go back to that question we had where you didn't say anything. So give me verse 3.
And Avram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir.
All right. So Avram kind of doubles down. And in a sense, the language has even gotten like more pointed. Like the first one was kind of poetic. Like, I remain childless. The one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus. God says nothing to that. And Avram says, no. I want an answer. You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Like, it's a little bit more curt. It's a little bit more, less poetry, like more straightforward. I have no kids.
The first time I remain childless. The second time, you have given me no children. The first time, names Eliezer of Damascus. The second time, hey, do you realize he's a servant? Like, just no name, he's a servant. Do you understand how he's not important?
Yeah. And I love to just pause here again and just say, man, who among us can we relate to Avram? Like, anybody been there where we're a little frustrated with God and we're like, God, I'm dying here. Like, I could use a little water for my thirst. I could use a little answers to my questions. Like, pretty frustrated. Like, we've been here before. We know what Avram's experiencing and what he's going through. Give us the next verse.
Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir.
All right. So God gives them a little bit. God's like, okay, I'll play. I'll play. I'll give you a little bit, but here's the problem. Well, this will be somewhat of a spoiler alert, but Avram's going to take this information. He's going to screw his story up. God's going to come to him and he's going to say, listen, it's not going to be Eliezer. It's not going to be your servant. It's going to be you. I've got descendants coming from you. And it will be the next chapter where Avram and Sarai are going to take this information. They're going to be like, oh, well, if it's going to come from you, well, then and again, they're going to make these plans that make sense to them, but isn't how God wants to do it. So I think one of the things I love to say here is sometimes we think we want answers, but God doesn't want to give them to us. He still does sometimes because he's in relationship with us. He loves us. He cares. And he engages. And sometimes he says nothing. And sometimes he says yes. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he answers our questions. But sometimes we think we want answers. God doesn't want to give them to us because if we had them, we would screw our own story up. And I think that's a decent reflection to pause just for a moment. Like sometimes we think we want answers to life's great questions. But at the end of the day, God knows that if we had answers, we wouldn't know what to do with them. And if we had them, we would actually screw our story up, just like Avram is going to. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's look at verse 5.
He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be.
Now, I love what I have learned from Elle as we've studied Hebrew together, as she's been my Hebrew teacher. There's this beautiful teaching. I've heard others, but Elle reminded me of it as we were studying different things. This phrase, he took him outside and said, look up at that sky and count the stars. The word for count etymologically is very closely connected to the word to tell, to recount, like to tell the story. And so there's a rabbinical commentary around the translation that essentially says what God is making Abraham is he's taking him outside and he's saying, go ahead and tell that to the stars, Avram. Like he's not just telling him to go out and count the stars because there's a lot of stars and all that. He's saying, go out and look up and tell that story. He's giving him a moment to have like a cosmological timeout, a little personal retreat day, little like go think about what you've been through. Go think about your story. Go think about my promise. Go tell that to the stars, Avram. Go outside and tell that to the stars. And so he goes out, and then after he's done having that moment, God says, so shall your offspring. And I love that context because give me the next verse.
Avram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
See, I love that because it gives a little bit more oomph to verse 6. Like it's not just God says you're going to have more descendants than the stars of the sky, and Avram decides he believes him. It's that Avram has this moment that he's wrestling with God. He has this moment of like, I want answers, and God kind of meets him where he's at, but he also kind of has this moment of like, go ahead and go tell the stars that. And Avram through this whole process ends up going like, all right, God. All right, I'll believe this. I'll trust the story. And Avram believes the Lord, and it's credited to him as righteousness. A huge verse for us New Testament followers of Jesus. That will end up being a huge verse for us much later. But I love that. Go ahead and keep taking us through this.
He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Avram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?
All right, so Avram, he's still not quite out of the woods yet. Avram's still a little cranky as I read this. He's still like, all right, I'm good, but I'm kind of done today with all of the promises and trust me. And Avram's like, all right, I need some collateral. All right, I've been doing the whole promises. I've been trusting the story. I'm willing to trust the story. I believed in God. It was credited to me as righteousness, but I need some collateral on this next one. How can I be sure that this is what's going to happen?
God's told him several times, but we're also reminded the Canaanites and Perizzites are in the land. We see the kings at war around him. Like there's a lot of stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I can understand Avram's position where he's like, how can I really know this?
Yep.
Are you sure about this?
Absolutely. All right, give us the next couple of verses.
So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Avram brought all of these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half.
Avram says, all right, I need some collateral. And God has an interesting response. He says, okay, you want collateral? Go get me a heifer, a goat, a ram, along with a dove and a pigeon. What strikes you as odd about verse 10, the next verse?
Avram was like, okay, and then he starts cutting them in half.
Right. Did God tell him to cut anything up?
No.
and yet Avram is like, oh yeah, sure. He goes and gets these and automatically starts doing something with them. And that's because what Avram is doing, what God asks him to do, Avram knows very intimately. In the ancient Near Eastern world, there was a covenant that was called a blood path covenant. A blood path covenant. They still even use these in some of these ancient Bedouin cultures today. I believe there's actually still a group of people called the Samaritans. I believe the Samaritans still have a similar practice even today to these blood path covenants.
Are you saying Samaritans or
Yes.
Samaritans?
No, Samaritans as in like the Good Samaritan.
Okay.
So there's still an active tribe of people today. The Samaritans aren't just an ancient group of people. They still exist today. And they still have some of these ancient practices in their culture, if I understand it correctly. But when we see this in the ancient Near Eastern world, it's almost always in connection to a betrothal covenant. So a covenant of engagement, where you have a patriarch and he's giving away his daughter in marriage, and the bridegroom to be shows up, and there is a blood path covenant. It's the agreement they make for the betrothal. And as we have it in record, it always looks pretty similar. You take the exact same animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, and you cut them in half, and you arrange them opposite each other where there's a couple hills, where it kind of forms a natural crevice, a natural dip, a natural little, whatever you want to call it. There's two, and actually, this is the picture that you have on your presentation depicts this. So you cut the heifer in half, you put one half on one side, one half on the other. Goat, ram do the same thing. The birds are so small that you put one bird on one side, one bird on another. You behead the birds. All the blood of these animals drains to the middle and forms a path in that crevice between the two hills. And the two parties will typically don white robes, and they walk the blood path. It's an agreement between a greater party and a lesser party. Now, we've already talked about suzerain vassal covenants. That's usually on a much greater, like a kingdom level. Like suzerain vassals, it's about kingdoms, one king and a conquered people. A blood path covenant is a similar idea. There's a greater party and a lesser party, but it's not about kingdoms. It's about families. It's about people, a father and a bridegroom. But there's still a greater party and a lesser party. Who do you suppose has to put their neck on the line first, Brent?
The lesser party, I suppose.
The lesser party. So they make this blood path covenant. And what happens in the ancient world is the lesser party, which is who? The bridegroom or the father?
The bridegroom.
The bridegroom. Because the father has what the bridegroom wants. The father is the person with leverage. He has the bride. The bridegroom wants the bride, so he has to go first. So he walks the blood path, and it is a Eastern way of saying, if I don't take care of your daughter, you may do this in my blood. You may walk in my blood. After he's done it, the second party goes through, which would be the father, the greater party, and says, okay, if I don't deliver on our promise, if I don't give you the daughter that you're asking for, as promised, you may do this in my blood. That's a blood path covenant, all right? This is something they're used to in their world for betrothals, as we would understand it in history. So when God says to Avram, bring me a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, Avram's like, oh yeah, no, I know what we're doing. We're doing a betrothal covenant. So he gets all these, he cuts them in two, and he puts them opposite each other. And then, give me verse 11.
Then the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Avram drove them away.
Which tells you what, Brent?
He's let it sit there for a while. Nothing's happened.
Yeah, these have been sitting there for a while. This didn't just happen 2 minutes ago. And now I've got birds of prey gathering. Like I've cut up the carcasses and they've been sitting there for a while. Because what God's done is God's essentially kind of called Avram's bluff. Avram's a little cranky. He's like, I don't know. You're my great reward. Okay, I believe God. I need some collateral. And God's like, all right, set up a betrothal covenant. And Avram realizes, all right, I'm the lesser party. So who's supposed to go through? Who's supposed to go through the blood path first?
Avram should walk through first.
And Avram ain't going nowhere. Because Avram realizes, if I put my pinky toe in this blood path covenant, I am never going to be able to deliver on my promise. I'm going to fail. I see God kind of going, all right, Avram, you want collateral? Let's do this. He sets up a covenant, and Avram realizes, I can't go. I can't go because I'm not going to be able to, I'm going to fail. I'm going to screw this covenant up. So let's see what happens. Go ahead and give us the next chunk of verses.
As the sun was setting, Avram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him.
All right. So interesting. When was the last time we saw somebody put into the same Hebrew phrase, deep sleep? Do you remember anybody being put into a deep sleep, Brent?
Was that Adam? Did that happen at Adam?
Yeah. And what happened while he was in a deep sleep?
His partner was formed.
In a sense, maybe the very first betrothal, you might say. What kind of a covenant is this?
Yes, okay.
Betrothal. Okay, that's just fun. But nevertheless, go ahead and keep reading.
Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
Okay, so God, it's a really weird paragraph. Like it really is odd. It seems like it doesn't fit. Like, why is God going into like... So he sets all this up, he puts them in a deep sleep, and I don't know if this is happening in a vision, it doesn't really tell us. But whatever's taking place here, God has this little monologue about what's going to happen to his descendants in the future. And this is all a part of the story of Genesis 15. Like, Avram's struggling, and Avram is demanding answers that God doesn't want to give him. And God gives him the answers, but God knows he's going to screw up the story. You see, part of what God's trying to communicate to Avram is like, listen, we're going to be okay. And we're going to enter into a covenant relationship. But the problem is that you came out of Egypt and you brought Egypt with you. Like literally. Like in a material way, he brought Egypt. He's got Egyptian goods and wealth. He also has Egyptian people. And the very next chapter, he's going to screw up the story by sleeping with, like they're going to come up with this great idea. If it's going to come through Avram's lineage, it's going to come through, in their mind, it has to come through who? Who's the character of Brent?
The servant Hagar.
Servant Hagar, who is from where?
Egypt.
Egypt. You see, Avram has brought Egypt literally, materially. He's brought Egypt with him. He's also brought Egypt with him in his heart. Like he's struggled to put his trust not in God, but he's also, and this is last episode you said, is going down to Egypt necessarily a bad thing? We were like, nah, I mean, no, but kind of yes. Like the thing that Egypt does to us is it gets inside of us. Like it's not necessarily wrong to go down to Egypt. It wasn't that Avram sinned by going down to Egypt, but there were consequences to going down to Egypt. And now Avram's brought Egypt with him, and now Egypt is a part of the story of God and his people. It's a part of the partnership, and God's going to have to work really hard. Spoiler alert. God's going to have to work really hard to get Egypt out of his people. Like we know the story of God getting his people out of Egypt, but we're going to say later, it's going to be a whole lot harder to get Egypt out of his people than to get his people out of Egypt. Like Avram has come, and so God has to say, listen, Avram, we're going to be okay, and we're doing the whole collateral thing, and I've given you a little bit of answers to your questions, but this is now going to create a problem. Like this is now a part of our story. And we're going to have some really fun things to say about this by the time we're in the book of Galatians, about 200 episodes from now. But I digress. We'll come back to this idea, but God pauses here to say there are consequences to our mistakes. There's consequences to the way that we live out our story. And it's not guilt. It's not that we have to carry this around. It's that we have to realize that our stories are tricky and they're complex and they're nuanced and they're real. And those consequences are real. Go ahead and keep giving us some more.
When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Avram and said, to your descendants I give this land. from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites.
All right. So at the end of this story, after God has his little monologue, what we're told is that a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch. Now, this is jumping a little bit further down the story, but what does smoke and fire always symbolize? If I think about like a pillar of smoke and a pillar of fire, smoke and fire, what does that always symbolize, Brent?
Yeah, the presence of God. The pillars are in the desert later on, but yeah, smoke and fire.
It's going to show up with Elijah. It's going to show up with Isaiah and his commissioning in Isaiah 6. Like smoke and fire always symbolize in the Jewish mind the presence of God. And so what happens is God walks through the blood path twice. God walks through on Avram's behalf and his behalf. A smoking fire pot and then a blazing torch both appear and pass between the pieces. God says, Avram, I know you can't put your pinky toe in this blood path. I know that you can't make this promise because I know that you're going to fail. But you know what? I'm going to pay the price on your behalf. When you fail, I got you. When you fail, Avram, I got you. In a lot of ways, the Jews will talk about the sacrifice at the temple later in the story when they have the sacrifice every single day in the morning and in the evening. When they hear the sound of the shofar in the temple courts, the rabbis say we always go back to this story. God made a promise to Avram to always provide. We see it again in the sacrifice of Isaac, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. God made a promise to always provide. This is what we're asking God to remember. We're asking God to remember Genesis 15. God made a promise, which is just full for all of us that are followers of Jesus. It's just full of Jesus. Like right here in Genesis 15, we haven't gotten very far in the story at all, Brent, and we're already running into the same grace-filled, gospel-laden God that we're going to find all throughout Old and New Testaments, First and Second Testaments. We're going to find the same story. God didn't change later on in the story when he gets to the New Testament. God has always been a God of grace. God has always been a God that has met his people. God has always been a God of forgiveness. This has always been who God was, which is beautiful. And we pause for a moment, but we don't end the episode there, because the very next chapter is the story of Hagar, Avram and Hagar and Ishmael, and her being driven out and running away. And so we have this beautiful, like God plants his flag in grace and forgiveness. Like we see the gospel in Genesis 15. Like we see the good stuff there. We see God's faithfulness. We see God's love and grace. And yet it doesn't remove the fact. We don't just sit there and go, oh, yay, forgiveness. Like there's also the reality of the consequences of our stories, and that we still have to, in light of grace, in light of forgiveness, we still have to acknowledge the fact that what we do matters, and our sin affects other people. And so we have this story of Hagar, and we're not going to read it all here because I want to spend some time in Genesis 17 before we're done today. But just to tell the story of Genesis 16, they take this information that God didn't want to give them, and they screw their own story up. They become convinced that they have a plan, and their plan's going to work, and so they have a son through Hagar. Avram and Hagar have a son named Ishmael, and that causes, shocker, probably shouldn't be shocking. It's going to cause all kinds of Beit-Av patriarchal dynamics. It's going to cause all kinds of relational mischief, and as the story reads, abuse of power between slaves and mistresses. It's a Nicky story. Like these consequences matter. And so she runs. God shows up. And for whatever reason, we can do this story some other time, God asks her to go back, and she says nothing. If you read Genesis 16, you'll notice that same literary device we've talked about before. God says, I need you to go back. She says nothing. And God said, no, listen, I'll take care of you. You'll have everything you'll need. We'll protect you. I got you. She says nothing. And God said, listen, I'll make and it's the angel, it's not God, it's the angel speaking on God's behalf. And the angel says, listen, your son will be great. He'll be made into a great kingdom. Like he draws out the promise more and more and more. And then Hagar says, okay, now I know that God sees me, which is going to be a big theme through the story of Genesis. The God who sees me. We'll hear that again before we're done. But Hagar finally, in her struggle, feels seen. And she goes back, and that story leads us into the story of Genesis 17 and the story of circumcision. And I think there's something really interesting and peculiar here that I learned from Rabbi David Foreman that I want to look at. So on your next slide, you will see the text of Genesis 17 sitting in front of you. I think 17, 1 through 21, I think. So, Brent, if you want to, let's just read this passage and see what's going on here.
Okay, Genesis 17. When Avram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Avram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Avram. Your name will be Avraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abraham, As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring. Whether born in your household or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. God also said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, If only Ishmael might live under your blessing. Then God said, Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him.
All right. So we have this, this tragic dysfunctional story of Genesis 16 with Hagar, and Genesis 17 shows up. She's now come back home, as the story tells it, and God comes to Avram and says, "Listen, I am God. I need you to walk. We have a partnership. I need you to walk before me faithfully and blameless." I hear that in the context of Hagar's mistreatment. I hear God saying, "We've got to do something. We got to address this power pyramid abuse that's in your household." And if we were reading this, did you ever get to a spot, Brent, as you were reading that, you were like, all right, I've now read that sentence about 3 times?
Yeah. The you and your descendants after you and the covenants and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Covenant as an everlasting covenant, descendants and descendants after you for generations to come, everlasting covenant, descendants after you and the generations to come, this covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Sounds very reminiscent of when we were in Noah's story. If you remember Noah's story, it was this covenant, and the rainbow and the clouds and the clouds and the covenant. When I see the rainbow, I remember the covenant and the everlasting covenant between you and all the earth, and the covenant and the covenant and the covenant and the clouds and the rainbow and the covenant and the clouds. There's that really repetitious part of Noah's covenant. And we found that in Noah's covenant, that happened to be what, Brent?
That was a chiasm.
Was a chiasm. And Foreman says, of course we have a chiasm here. And we probably should have caught it right from the very beginning. If you go to the next slide, you'll actually see the chiasm take shape before you. You can see the bookends. Some of us might have caught it. Avram falls face down twice. At the beginning and at the end of the story. He falls face down in verse 3. He falls face down in verse 17. The verse really previous, or should I say, let's see, the verse after verse 3, let's go to verse 5. Avram gets his name changed. The verse right before verse 17, Sarah gets her name changed. So Avram goes to Abraham, Sarai goes to Sarah. There's a mention of everlasting covenant in verse 7. There's a mention of everlasting covenant in verse 13. The mention of foreigner is a unique usage. That word gets used in verse 8 and then again in verse 12. Generations to come gets used a few times, but you could, if you wanted to, for the sake of the chiasm, show it in verse 9 and then in verse 11, making the center phrase of the chiasm in verse 10, every male among you shall be circumcised. Now, Foreman, when he taught this, said, I just want to note what I'm seeing in the chiasm. First of all, I'm seeing Avram being humbled. He falls face down. The next thing I'm seeing is I'm seeing the change of names. And Foreman pointed out, what's interesting is that Avram, that means exalted father. Avram, exalted father in the Hebrew. Avraham means father of many. So what got taken out of his name, Brent?
The exaltedness.
Yeah, the exaltedness. Foreman looked at Sarah's name and he said, wait a minute, Sarai, according to rabbinic tradition, looking at her name in the Semitic languages, means my princess. Sarah simply means princess. So what got removed from Sarah's name?
The possession part of it.
The possession part of it. What's happening in this story, see, Hagar has just returned, and God is saying, all right, we're going to remove the power pyramid from your family. Your family, there's a power pyramid that's leading to all kinds of mistreatment and abuse. So we are going to, on a covenantal level, we are going to remove your exaltedness. We are going to remove the fact that people are possessions. And the center of the chiasm, every male among you shall be circumcised. Foreman made the point, and we're not trying to be funny or be crude, but where's the only time you're going to notice somebody's circumcision? If they're standing what?
They're standing naked.
If they're standing naked in front of you. And the one thing about standing naked is we're all just people. Like, the only reason I'd be able to tell, like, who is who is if I could see somebody wearing slaves' clothes. If I could see Avram wearing the clothes of a patriarch. If I'm just standing naked in front of whoever, I can't tell whether or not, are you a slave? Are you a servant? And every male, and this is about, I mean, obviously circumcision is a male thing. Every person we're going to equalize everybody in this family of God. There is a neutralizing. We're going to take away the exaltedness. We're going to take away the possessive nature. God is shaping and growing his partner. He didn't demand this at the very beginning all up front. He didn't give them Torah in Genesis 12. He's slowly teaching them. He's slowly shaping. We might use language like he's slowly sanctifying them. He's calling them to, as his partner, embrace and embody his character. I want you to take away these things that are leading to injustice, and I want you to walk in righteousness and justice before me. I want you to walk faithfully and blamelessly. He's making them more like the people he wants them to be. One story, one mistake at a time. They keep doing wonderful things. They also keep failing. They keep doing wonderful things. They also keep failing. And every time they fail, every time they walk in faithfulness, God keeps adding one more little wrinkle, shaping, transforming, sanctifying, making them into the people he wants them to be. This is what our journeys are to be full of. God shaping us into people that look more and more and more like the partner he wants to use to bless how many nations, Brent?
All nations.
All nations. There you go. Have any questions? Anything about circumcision or anything?
Why would I have any questions about that? That's totally normal. Yeah, we do have some questions about that. We have many times like where did this idea even come from?
Were they like used to circumcision before? Was that like a brand new idea? And we know a couple things from the ancient world. First of all, we know that other Eastern cultures, not necessarily connected to or related to the Bible necessarily, some ancient African cultures, for instance, practice circumcision. Oftentimes it's created to some male rite of passage, which means it's done much later, not when they're young babies, not on the 8th day, like this covenantal family of God, but more as a tribal kind of passage into manhood when they're much older, which has to be much more uncomfortable. But nevertheless, I digress. However, one of the places where Avram may have run into it is we do have a bunch of evidence of circumcision existing in Egypt. Usually when we encounter it in Egypt, it's almost always connected to priesthood. So when somebody becomes a priest in Egypt, Egyptian priest, they're circumcised. So this is something that they may have encountered. It's something that Hagar might have been, and other members of their expanded Egyptian household might have been familiar with. It's something that Avram and Sarai might have encountered while they were down in Egypt. They might have encountered circumcision before. And if they did, I wonder even at times, Brent, if we're hearing this subtle kingdom of priests. What I'm doing here is I'm building a kingdom of priests. Circumcision is for the priests. I'm building a kingdom of priests. I wonder if we're not supposed to maybe even hear, if maybe even Avram wouldn't have maybe heard those undertones as well, that he had some kind of priestly, that God's people and the family of God has some priestly calling that will be called out and defined much more clearly later in Torah. But that is something that they may have been familiar with. It's a great question that came up in our first round of study when we did this as a podcast.
Yeah, and we have a few resources we'll throw out there. There's the Wikipedia page on the history of male circumcision that might give you a little bit of an overview and maybe even point you to some other stuff. We mentioned a couple episodes ago a book called The Epic of Eden. She does have a passage in there talking about circumcision, some of the evidence for circumcision in Egypt specifically. She says it does seem like it was a rite of passage and was done in large groups, and that the Israelite practice of circumcision is unique in its practice of circumcising babies. So, a distinction there. Again, could have been priesthood, could have been other things. There's a lot we don't know. But yeah, that connection there. And then the kingdom of priests idea obviously plays in. George DeYoung has a ministry called Under the Fig Tree. He leads trips to Egypt. He might have some material on that. Yeah, the Anchor Bible Dictionary, Volume 1, there's an article by Robert G. Hall on circumcision, so you can check that out. Some stuff to dig into if you really want to dive into the topic.
Sounds good. Some good resources in this episode. I think that sets us up to wrap this episode up and look ahead to the next one.
Yeah, and I'll just throw a reminder in there for people who have a tendency to get caught in the weeds. Like, yes, you could probably spend the next couple of months digging into all these things and studying the history of circumcision, but we don't want to get stuck here. So, don't get bogged down by that, but we just want to provide those resources when we have them, so that if it is something you want to come back to later, like those are all there. But remember, we're trying to get the whole narrative of God's story in the world through the Bible. So don't get stuck. But all those resources, everything will be listed on BearmontDiscipleship.com, as well as in your podcast app. You can use the website to get in touch with us, use the contact page. Everything you need is there. So thanks for joining us on the Bearmont Podcast this week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Hi, I'm Mark Sennett, a Bema listener in Riverside, California, and here's the prayer from Episode 10's companion. God, time and time again, you meet us where we are. You send us reminders of your love. You clothe us, redeem us, rescue us, and walk through the blood path for us. You are the God who sees us, each and every one. Because of you, I find peace in the unknown, In the midst of my unanswered questions, and when I gaze up at the stars, I'll trust the goodness of the story and the answers you hold. Amen.